So you've probably heard someone say that Christians aren't allowed to judge other people, and that Jesus taught that judging is wrong and that Christians should never do that. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that Christians aren't ever allowed to say this is right or this is wrong, or to tell someone that the way they're living is wrong? Not really. That isn't really what Jesus says. So we're going to look at some passages where Jesus talks about judging. But really, as we read it, what we want to think about is there's a massive difference in going to someone with an issue that they might have, with a heart that's trying to restore that person, and going to someone in a way where you're trying to destroy that person. There's a difference. So let's look at Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. This is the famous passage where Jesus says, "Do not judge, so that you will not be judged." So the first thing we see there is he's saying, don't judge so that you will not be judged. But it's not necessarily that he's claiming you can't judge. He's just saying that when you do, get ready, because you're also opening yourself up for judgment. For in the way that you judge, verse 2, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. So why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So if we read this, really Jesus is actually laying down some rules about judging. For one, he's saying if you're going to do it, realize and be warned, you need to be following the same standard, because whatever standard you set, you're admitting you realize you yourself should live that way. And there's something here to be said about being a hypocrite. That's a huge focus in what he's saying, is that you would call someone out for something really small when you have really big problems in your life, and nitpicking people's life, or judging harshly, or being self-righteous. The whole heart of the way that this is being handled in this way that Jesus is talking is that someone who's trying to literally hurt someone, and clearly they're self-righteous and think that they're better when that's not the case. So the reason we know that Jesus isn't saying that we should never call someone out is because actually in chapter 18, a few chapters later, Jesus lays out what we should do when people are sinning. And he actually says that if a brother sins against you, you should go and rebuke them of that sin and try and win that brother over. If they listen, then you won them over. If they don't, Jesus says that you should go grab someone else, have them go with you, and if still that doesn't happen, that the church should exercise judgment against this person and actually kick them out until they repent at least. So this is found in Matthew 18, starting in verse 15. So it isn't that as Christians we're not allowed to hold people accountable or to call people out when they're sinning, but it's really the way that we do that. Because even in that passage that we just mentioned, that you would do it privately, not openly, where you're trying to embarrass someone in front of a bunch of people. But Jesus is really laying down rules for when we judge, that we shouldn't do it in a hypocritical way, that we should do it in a private way, and not in a self-righteous way where we don't realize that we have sin in our own lives. When we condemn someone and say that because of their sin they deserve punishment, the Bible teaches in Romans that we're also condemning ourselves, because since we're sinners, they're sinners. If we say their sin deserves to be punished, well, we've immediately declared we need to be punished too, because all of us are guilty. So the Bible does teach that when it comes to condemning or casting sentence upon people, that really God's the only one in a place to actually take judgment on someone in a standpoint of holding them accountable in punishing. But when it comes to walking up to someone and saying, hey, the way you're living is hurting you and hurting others, we as Christians are actually called to do that in a loving way. I think it's pretty simple for most people to see the difference. And I think it's pretty ridiculous to say that Christians are never allowed to walk up to someone and say the way that you're living is wrong. No one really believes that. It's just simply a card that people have played against the church for years and years to say that we're supposed to be totally silent when we see wrong things going on and we're not allowed to speak out. It's just not really what Jesus taught when you look at the full scope of what he was saying. So we're allowed to hold people accountable, but be careful when you do, because you're going to be held to that same standard.